I'm Faye, and I work in an office at a university hospital. I'm married to Stephen, and I thought this would be a new chapter in my life. But, surprise, our married life turned out to be really short. I didn't see that coming when we tied the knot. Stephen has been a manager at a home improvement store since we started dating. When we first met, I thought Stephen was kind, family-oriented, and decisive. He confidently proposed, and I said yes, thinking he was reliable. Stephen, who used to live with his parents, moved in with me after we got married. Despite our busy schedules, we managed to sync our days off and were planning our honeymoon. Just talking about it made me happy, and back then, I was really glad I married Stephen. But over time, things started to change. Our home, where Stephen and I lived, was a 3-bedroom apartment just 2 years old. It was new, albeit a bit far from the city and not a luxury high-rise, making it reasonably priced. Considering all factors, I decided to go for it, and living there was pretty convenient. Stephen wasn't into luxury, so it was comfortable for both of us. Then one day, Stephen told me, "My mom and sister want to come over tomorrow to see our new home, so I've invited them." My initial reaction was that he should have talked to me about the date, considering I had work the next day while he was off. His decisiveness was good, but sometimes it hurt me when he didn't consider my feelings. I said, "I'll be at work, is that okay?" Stephen replied, "Sure, we'll just take a quick look around the house, and that's it." I agreed, thinking it would be a simple visit. However, when I got home the next evening, the atmosphere was lively. There was a pleasant smell, and in the living room, Stephen, my mother-in-law, and sister-in-law had prepared food and drinks, enjoying themselves. "What's happening?" I exclaimed. My mother-in-law, looking a bit tipsy, greeted me enthusiastically. "Oh, Faye, you're home. Done with work?" "You've been working hard." My sister-in-law, with a cheerful expression, said, "Hey, Buffet, you must be tired. But wow, this house is amazing. It's not fair that you get to live in such a place." Stephen was enjoying the moment, and I was the only one feeling out of the loop. "I was told you were coming for a house tour, but did you plan on having dinner as well?" I asked, trying not to upset them, as what was happening differed from what Stephen had told me. I felt a bit upset, but Stephen, with a smile, casually replied, My mom and sister said they had plenty of time, so we thought, why not have dinner?" Even though he said it was their time he was considering, not mine. I wanted to convey that I don't dislike my mother-in-law or sister-in-law, but I don't want to be on my toes in my own home. However, Stephen said, "My dad is not around anymore, and it's always just the two of them. They need a change of scenery once in a while." He said this in a carefree manner. Hearing this, my mother-in-law said, "Stephen is such a kind boy, Faye. You should appreciate that you got to marry Stephen," as if I was being taken care of by Stephen. I wanted to retort, "I'm working and earning too, you know." But then I thought, maybe it's okay to let them have a family dinner once in a while. So I decided to step back. I didn't want any conflict, and they had bought the groceries and prepared the meal themselves. But then my mother-in-law said something that left me shocked. "But this fridge is stocked with good meat, high-quality meat. Really, it is delicious." I couldn't believe my ears for a moment. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were clearly using our groceries. The alcohol and snacks my sister-in-law enjoyed were the exact ones we bought. "Didn't you get these yourself?" I asked. My mother-in-law nonchalantly replied, "Well, if there's this much in the fridge, no need to go shopping, right? Going to the supermarket is a hassle." She said it without any remorse. To add to it, she said, "I'm tired now, so if you want to eat something, Faye, you'll have to make it yourself." I was genuinely angry about the whole situation. Though my emotions were ready to burst, I somehow managed to suppress my anger and responded with a forced smile. "Is that so? Well, I'll handle my share then," I said, heading to my room. It seems some of my frustration leaked out when I closed the living room door, making a louder noise than intended. Shortly after, I could faintly hear my mother-in-law and sister-in-law talking. "Oh my, is she always this rough? Is she okay?" My sister-in-law added, in such a nice house. I wonder if Faye won't end up breaking something, right? Stephen casually responded, I'll remind her later. She's probably just tired from work. And after all that, my in-laws left without cleaning up. Stephen even came to my room and lightly scolded me. What's with all the irritation? It's not nice to my moms, you know. Honestly, all this without my permission, and them leaving without cleaning up was too much. When I told him, Stephen tried to pacify me. Calm down, it's a one-time thing. I'll take care of the cleaning, just relax. I wasn't convinced, but I thought it wasn't worth a fight and managed to suppress my anger. I forcibly considered it part of Stephen's family love and regained my composure. With our honeymoon approaching in a month, I didn't want to ruin our relationship. After all, this wouldn't happen again. Now I just need to focus on our honeymoon and lift my spirits. However, that honeymoon turned out to bring misfortune. A month later, we embarked on our honeymoon, a 3-night trip to Alaska. While I wouldn't have minded an overseas adventure, Stephen preferred to keep it simple. He felt staying within the country was sufficient, so we settled on this plan. The hotel we chose was nice, and we enjoyed the local cuisine, hot springs, and the mesmerizing northern lights, creating cherished memories. As our delightful journey neared its end, we began our journey back home, feeling a tinge of sadness that it was over. We talked about planning another getaway someday. However, just as we were about to reach home, a sudden realization struck me. Did I remember to lock the bathroom window before leaving the house? Living on the 4th floor of an apartment building with a small bathroom window, I didn't think there was a risk of burglary. Still, the thought crossed my mind, and I mentioned it to Stephen. His casual response was, It'll be fine. My mother and sister are there. I was perplexed. What? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law are at our house now. I didn't hear about this. Stephen, with a calm expression, casually replied, Oh, didn't I tell you? They said they'd clean up while we're away. It's really helpful, you know. Dust piles up after 3 or 4 days. He said it cheerfully, revealing that he had given the house keys to my mother-in-law without informing me. This revelation stirred my frustration once again. From that point, I barely spoke to Stephen and hurried home faster than usual, anxious about what was happening in our house. Upon entering the living room, as expected, they were having another gathering. Moreover, dishes made from food likely taken from our refrigerator were spread out. Oh, you're back. Did you have a good time? My mother-in-law casually called out. I was in no state to give her a proper answer. Despite her mention of cleaning up, the place was messier than before, and there were even more bags from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Seeing all that, I couldn't contain my frustration any longer. Enough. What are you doing? Please go home. This is our house. It's a problem if you keep doing as you please, I blurted out, unable to hold back my emotions. My mother-in-law remarked, Why are you so upset? I'm not in a position to say anything. This is Stephen's house, so there shouldn't be a problem with whatever we, as his family, do. My sister-in-law, adopting a somewhat arrogant attitude, added, Exactly, Faye. If anything, we have more right to live here than you. I just can't grasp their perspective. I'm contributing to the expenses of this house too, you know. It's as much my home as it is yours, so I expect you to seek my permission as well. I was overcome with a sense that I no longer wanted to hold back. There was also a concern that if I didn't speak up, they would overstep their bounds. What fueled my determination further was the unexpected remark, Hey, Faye, you need to stop. How can you speak to my family like that? We're all going to live here from now on. Don't be so selfish. His words left me momentarily stunned. Living with these in-laws? Was it decided without my knowledge again? Unable to suppress my frustration, I retorted back to Stephen. So why do you make decisions on your own without informing me? Can't you consult with me at least once? Who's being selfish here? This is ridiculous. The cheerful atmosphere from our honeymoon trip was nowhere to be found. The room had turned into a battlefield, but as always, Stephen was the one to put an end to the tension. Enough. "If you dislike living here so much, Faye, you can leave," he commanded, as if delivering a final blow. Surprisingly, his words had the opposite effect on me. They brought a sense of calm. It dawned on me that I couldn't continue living with these people. If that's the case, there's no reason for me to stick around with Stephen and the others. I could have questioned Stephen when he made that statement. "Are you sure about that?" However, my inclination to avoid further entanglement prevailed. Thus, I nonchalantly responded, all the while sporting a smirk. "Okay, got it. I'll be out of here in no time." My mother-in-law and sister-in-law might not have grasped why I was grinning, but they would eventually figure it out. Subsequently, I swiftly packed only the essentials and left the house. Stephen's parting words were "cool off for a while," but I was already composed and harbored no intention of returning. He seemed to assume I would come back. I reached out to my parents, requested temporary accommodation, initiated divorce preparations, and commenced the search for a new place to live. Although Stephen attempted to call me several times, I ignored him due to my busy schedule. After about 2 months, I had settled into my new residence. Recalling that I still had belongings at the house shared with Stephen, I decided to answer his call for the first time in a while. It was evident from the start that he was in a state of panic. "Faye, finally." "What are you doing? Come back now," he urgently repeated. Indeed, Stephen believed I was returning. Remembering this, I responded firmly, "No, I'm not coming back. In fact, I've already filed for divorce and consulted with a lawyer. Let's discuss the property division." He was taken aback. Divorce? Please not that. I can't deal with that right now," he pleaded, growing even more frantic. To be frank, I had a pretty good idea of what was happening. When I inquired, "What's the matter?" he confessed, "I'm broke. I'm already in debt, so come back quickly." Well, that wasn't entirely surprising. I had seen it coming. Perhaps he thought he could afford to kick me out, assuming I would return. But to his disappointment, he was mistaken. Stephen wasn't earning much to begin with. His take-home pay was around $2,000 a month, and the monthly mortgage for the condo we bought was $2,000. So how was he managing it? I was contributing $1,500, and he was only putting in $500. Given that I was earning over 3 times his salary, it wasn't an issue. That's why I covered all other expenses like utilities and groceries. Even our honeymoon had to be modest because he claimed he had no money. At some point, I realized that it wasn't that he had expensive tastes. He simply lacked the income. Once I left, he had to shoulder all the expenses on his own. The condo was in his name, and the payments were deducted from his account. Consequently, with my departure, he lost the $1,500 I used to contribute every month. To make matters worse, Stephen's unemployed mother-in-law and sister-in-law were now living with him, undoubtedly adding to the living expenses. Therefore, it was natural for me to feel upset when Stephen made decisions about the house independently or casually used items from the fridge. With just his salary, they wouldn't be able to make ends meet for a month, and drowning in debt seemed inevitable at this rate. My mother was furious, demanding, "Why did you kick Faye out? Come back home immediately and do something." I was left speechless, realizing that his mother and sister were under the mistaken impression that he earned a decent living given his title as a store manager. However, the harsh reality was that this title didn't necessarily translate into a high salary. We had bought a reasonably decent condo, and they wholeheartedly believed that Stephen was the primary contributor. It was pitiful and could only be described as foolish. Additionally, it turned out that the mother-in-law, having exhausted all her deceased husband's assets, ended up moving into my house broke. Despite previously living in a rented apartment, they seemed to have properly terminated that lease. The situation made me cringe at having any familial ties with them. Now more than ever, I wanted to finalize our divorce. Upon suggesting, "Proceed with the divorce process with your lawyer. Then we'll discuss the financial aspects," Stephen responded, "Oh, really? Okay, so all I have to do is fill out the paperwork with my lawyer and send it back to the court, right? His voice sounded relieved. Our divorce was finalized without any complications. While visiting my previous residence to organize my belongings, I completed the shipping procedures for my luggage. Despite his mother and sister being present, Stephen said, "Phew, you really saved me, Faye. I'm already $10,000 in debt. If things continue as they are, it's going to increase by another $5,000 this month." I was shocked at how rapidly he accumulated such a substantial debt. Evidently, his mother and sister had extremely poor spending habits, yet they seemed shameless, grinning while relying on my financial support. So, I suggested, how about your mother and sister start working for the money? If all three of you contribute, it should somehow work out, right? Stephen and his mother were taken aback, and he questioned, Aren't you going to help us out? What does that mean? Calmly, I responded, What does that mean? That should be my question. Why should I cover your living expenses? Earn your own share. I didn't say I would pay. I said I would consider it. So I came up with a way for you guys to sustain yourselves. They started making a commotion, insisting, This wasn't our agreement. Are you really our daughter-in-law? I replied, I'm not your daughter-in-law anymore, so good luck. I then got into my car and left my former residence. After a while, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law reluctantly began their job search. However, due to their laziness, they didn't make much progress. Meanwhile, the loans kept piling up, and living expenses continued to grow. Despite this, they maintained extravagant tastes, and Stephen's debt only escalated. Eventually, he resorted to borrowing from some risky sources, living in constant fear of debt collectors. On the other hand, I could finally use my hard-earned money for myself, enjoying hobbies and travel. Living a fulfilled life motivated me even more at work. One day, a colleague at work, who had been a listening ear during my complaints about Stephen, approached me and said, You've been glowing recently, Faye. This became an opportunity for us to start dating, further enriching my daily life. When I was 16, my parents told me to leave home because they needed space for my sister's new baby. Feeling abandoned, I shared my story online, and when my dad realized that his wealthy parents might cut him out of their will, he pleaded with me to take down the post. I just turned 16 last week, but there was no celebration or party for me. My parents barely acknowledged my birthday before telling me I had to leave our house. It turns out my older sister Amanda, who's always been their favorite, is pregnant. Despite having enough space in our 4-bedroom house, they want me to move to my aunt's place to make room for the baby. My parents have never been very caring towards me, but this felt like a new low. They were dead serious during our talk, so I knew they weren't joking or trying to prank me. After explaining that they needed the extra space and that I was old enough to leave, we sat in silence for a while. They promised to continue supporting me financially until I turned 18 and ensure I had everything I needed, but they couldn't have me living with them anymore. I didn't want to argue, but I asked why they couldn't use the guest room for the nursery. They hesitated before admitting they'd given it to Amanda's boyfriend to stay with them. So in short, my parents had their own room, my sister and her boyfriend had another, and the baby would have its own too. Amanda wasn't home, probably on purpose to avoid seeing me leave and feeling guilty. We weren't close due to our age gap, but she'd never been mean to me either. We were mostly polite to each other. But if she was okay with me leaving so she could make room for her baby and boyfriend, maybe she wasn't the sister I thought she was. It hurt, especially on my birthday, but I didn't argue and agreed to go. It's clear to me now that my parents are beyond help. There's no magic phrase to make my parents care about me, and I've come to terms with that. So when they said they wanted me to move in with my aunt, I quietly went to my room and started packing. They helped, but it felt more like they were hurrying me along. They drove me to my aunt's, chatting happily all the way, oblivious to my silence as I stared out the window. When we arrived, they dropped me off without a hug or kiss, then drove off. My aunt greeted me warmly, genuinely happy to see me. We talked, and eventually, I shared my disappointment with my parents' actions. Her smile vanished, replaced by concern, when I recounted the morning's events. Without a word, my aunt grabbed her phone and excused herself to make a call in the other room. It was unusually quiet for a while until I heard her raising her voice, something she rarely did. I knew someone must have really upset her to provoke such a reaction. When she returned, her face was flushed with anger, a rare sight for her gentle demeanor. She explained that it was my parents who had angered her so much. Apparently, my dad, her brother, had falsely claimed that I had suggested the living arrangement for the baby's sake and that I was perfectly content moving in with my aunt. That's why my aunt was fine with taking me in. She could see I wasn't happy living with my parents, so my suggestion didn't seem out of place to her. Dad tried to persuade her, but she's single and not planning on marriage or kids, so having me around was like having a roommate, and Dad would cover my expenses. She genuinely liked having me and thought I wanted to be there, so she agreed. But now that she knew the truth, she called Dad to confront him. It was messed up, and she wasn't going to let it slide. After the call, she was upset, and so was I. This wasn't something most kids my age dealt with. I always knew they favored my sister, but this was extreme. They had lied to my aunt to cover up their actions, knowing how terrible it was. They gave up the guest room for Amanda's boyfriend, who's in his 20s, has a job and his own place. Amanda could have easily moved in with him, but my parents insisted she stay home to be closer to them, even if it meant sacrificing my comfort. It hurt me deeply, so I decided to go online and reveal what they had done. Unsure if my aunt would support me, I waited until she left the room, then posted everything on my phone without a second thought. I detailed not only that day's events, but also how my parents consistently treated me unfairly, making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home. It was an emotional moment for me, and the post reflected that. After posting, tears streamed down my face. I turned off my phone, fearing the consequences. An hour later, I attempted to read but couldn't concentrate. When my aunt woke up, she hurried to the living room, where I sat since arriving. She calmly asked if I had posted something. I admitted I had. That was the extent of our conversation. I powered on my phone to find that family members had seen the post, and I had received numerous texts from my parents and sister. Meanwhile, relatives commented, expressing support, some reaching out to offer help. Despite the support from relatives, reading my parents' messages filled me with dread. They were seething with anger and hatred, demanding I remove the post. My dad's messages were particularly hurtful, even expressing regret for my existence. My mom's echoed his sentiments. The only slightly different message came from my sister, who simply asked to speak in person. I was overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and messages, unsure how to respond. So, I set my phone aside and withdrew from communication for a few days. Eventually, I decided to block my parents, feeling no desire to engage with them further. I knew my parents were obligated to support me financially until I turned 18, so besides that, I saw no reason to communicate with them. My aunt supported my decision, and if my dad tried to contact her, she didn't mention it to me. We acted as if nothing had happened, indicating her support for me. That was all I needed. For the past week, I had little to no contact with my parents. However, today they unexpectedly appeared outside my school, visibly upset. Fortunately, my friends, who were aware of the situation, surrounded me as a protective barrier, allowing me to avoid interaction with my parents if I chose not to. Despite my reluctance, they continued calling my name, forcing me to acknowledge them. I approached them and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with them. However, they ignored my plea and insisted that I accompany them home immediately. Their sudden change of heart baffled me, considering how little I mattered to them before. It seemed like they were only concerned about their reputation among family members. Refusing to go anywhere until I understood their motives, I demanded an explanation for their behavior. They appeared angry yet insistent on my return. Concerned about my friends overhearing, I requested privacy to speak with them. Once my friends were out of earshot, my parents revealed the reason for their sudden appearance. They explained that they needed me to come back because I had been ignoring their calls and texts, and it was crucial for them to have me return to secure their inheritance. After my online post, word spread throughout the family, reaching my grandparents. Knowing that my paternal grandparents were quite wealthy, they threatened my dad, stating that if they didn't improve their treatment of me and reconcile, my dad would forfeit his inheritance. They were informed that if they failed to mend our relationship and ensure my well-being, my aunt, who was caring for me, would inherit instead. Losing the inheritance was not an option for my dad, as it represented a significant amount of money. Although my parents had a decent income, I understood their desire to secure their inheritance. However, their approach left much to be desired. It was clear they were acting in their own self-interest, not mine. Their lack of empathy was glaring, and I refused to play along. I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away, ignoring their pleas. Taking the bus back to my aunt's, I recounted the ordeal to her, and she shared my frustration. To prevent a repeat, she enlisted the help of her lawyer to explore options for my custody. Despite my parents' legal rights, I knew changes were necessary for me to live with my aunt. I also reached out to my grandparents to thank them for intervening, but made it clear I had no desire to return home after experiencing life with my aunt. I finally felt liberated. Living with my parents had been stifling, and I held on to hope for change that never came. Since my grandparents lived in another city, our meetings were infrequent. However, during holiday gatherings, my parents put on a facade to conceal the truth of my treatment at home. It wasn't outright cruelty, but rather neglect and avoidance. While everything appeared fine on the surface, spending a few days at my parents' house would reveal that they mostly ignored me, focusing solely on my sister. With her pregnancy, the situation worsened, and I was completely sidelined. I confided in my grandparents about everything, and they assured me that if living with my aunt was what I wanted, they would ensure it happened. They promised to cover all my needs if my parents relinquished their rights. This conversation brought me immense relief, but it was short-lived. Just a few hours later, I received an email from my dad. It wasn't hostile, but it was disheartening. He expressed disappointment in my decision to share our family issues online, arguing that my grandparents would have learned about it eventually. Now, not only were my grandparents upset with them, but they were also facing backlash from other relatives, feeling ostracized, which they deemed unfair. He mentioned that even some of his colleagues had come across the post because it was public and had appeared on their feeds due to his tagging. This had created an uncomfortable situation for him at work, and he believed that my actions had unnecessarily stirred up drama in their lives. In hindsight, I regretted sharing the story about my parents asking me to leave on my 16th birthday to make room for my pregnant sister's baby. Update 1. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who took the time to comment on my post. Your supportive words mean a lot to me, so thank you. Now, addressing some of the questions many of you have asked regarding why I hadn't left my parents' house earlier and why I waited for them to ask me to leave, especially when my grandparents and aunt were willing to assist. The reason I didn't seek help earlier is that, as I mentioned in the original post, I wasn't subjected to outright cruelty. While I wasn't treated poorly, I felt ignored and unwelcome, which in its own way is a form of mistreatment. However, I convinced myself that as long as I had shelter and food, I was fine, even if I didn't feel loved. The neglect had become so normalized for me that I didn't realize its impact. As for why I didn't turn to my family for assistance, I didn't want to burden them. I feared the consequences if they refused to help and my parents found out. My parents placed great importance on appearances, so I kept my struggles to myself, suffering in silence. Additionally, my aunt didn't offer to take me in earlier out of respect for my parents, and she wasn't sure if I would want to live with her. However, the current situation unfolded naturally, and in hindsight, it's turned out for the best, albeit a bit late. My aunt is currently consulting with a lawyer to pursue transferring my custody rights to her, which will likely be challenging given the stakes involved with the inheritance. However, I have confidence that my grandparents and aunt will support me, even if it leads to legal proceedings. My aunt has been genuinely remorseful since my arrival, acknowledging the neglect I faced at home and regretting not intervening sooner. At least now, there's clarity within my family, and I'm feeling optimistic about the future. Regarding my sister, she reached out to me, expressing a desire to meet in person. Unsure how to respond, I chose to ignore her message. While she hasn't been overly unkind to me personally, she has adopted the same distant behavior as my parents. I had assumed that the decision to kick me out for her boyfriend and child was her idea, leading me to believe that our relationship might sour further as a result. I didn't respond to her initial message. Despite our strained relationship, I still felt closer to her than my parents because she treated me kindly whenever we interacted. It wasn't her fault that my parents favored her over me. So when she reached out again 3 days ago, asking me to visit, I decided to call her and inquire about her intentions. I assumed she wanted me to come back home, but to my surprise, she explained that she was currently living with her boyfriend and wasn't feeling well enough to go out. Instead, she wanted us to discuss the family situation. Intrigued, I agreed to meet her. Upon arriving, she began by apologizing for never standing up for me, despite knowing our parents' biased treatment. While they overlooked my achievements to celebrate hers, I always felt like the least wanted child. However, she admitted to never feeling comfortable confronting our parents about this issue, especially since I appeared to tolerate it. Her reluctance to speak up contributed to the status quo. Now realizing how unfair this was, she apologized and expressed a desire for change. She also revealed that the living arrangement was a surprise to her, as our parents hadn't discussed it with her. She was shocked to learn that they had asked me to leave to make room for the new baby and her boyfriend because she had no prior knowledge of this plan. In fact, she hadn't requested any such arrangement. Her original intention was to stay with our parents until the baby was a few months old, at which point she planned to move in with her boyfriend. She had considered leaving earlier but stayed at our parents' insistence. However, after reading my post, she realized that the situation couldn't continue and decided to move out within a week. This decision led to a major confrontation with our parents, who disagreed with her choice to leave. They accused her of being ungrateful and selfish, despite the fact that she had never made any promises to them. They had simply assumed things on their own. As a result of this disagreement, they stopped speaking to each other. In the end, all the drama amounted to nothing, as my parents ended up losing both of their children. At least she had the decency to apologize for her shortcomings as a sister and as a person in general, which I accepted because harboring resentment wouldn't benefit me in any way. We had a heart-to-heart conversation, and she assured me, much like my aunt did, that she would be there for me unconditionally from now on. It was a comforting reassurance. It's been almost a week since I made my original post, and I still haven't heard from my parents since the email. I assume they've abandoned their attempts to reconcile with me. I suspect my grandparents played a role in this, as they called me to inform me that my parents would no longer bother me and that I need not worry about them showing up at my school or contacting me again. I hadn't mentioned my dad's email to them, so I assumed there was a discussion between my parents and grandparents. Although I'm unsure about the details of their conversation, I believe my parents have given up by now. Update 2. It's only been 3 days since my last update, and today my aunt delivered some surprising news. My parents have agreed to relinquish their parental rights. The legal formalities are underway, and soon my aunt will become my legal guardian. It's a mix of emotions for me. On one hand, I'm relieved that I'll finally have a home where I feel valued and wanted, but on the other hand, there's a sense of emptiness and sadness. It's strange to finally see this happening, but I know it's for the best. This is what I've been hoping for. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my aunt took over as my legal guardian. It's official now, and I couldn't be happier. Interestingly, I learned that my parents agreed to give up custody because my grandparents gave them an ultimatum: either lose their entire inheritance or keep 50% and forfeit custody of me, with the condition that they never contact me again. I'm not surprised by their choice, and honestly, I'm not even upset. It feels like I've escaped a troubling situation. Good riddance, I say. I'm still in contact with my sister, although my parents are attempting to reconcile with her before her due date. However, she's requested some time alone, urging them to respect her space and cease their daily attempts to reach out. Honestly, I can't help but chuckle at the chaotic situation they created within their own family. But you know what? I'm content with my aunt, and that's all that truly matters to me. A year back, we promised to love each other forever. I was sure I wanted to be with this kind man. But things changed after we got married. The sweet guy I knew disappeared. Now he treats me like a maid, not his wife. He always tells me to be quiet and just listen to him. I wonder how long this will go on. Little did I know, something good was about to happen. Hi, I'm Michelle Jenkins, 28 years old. I work as a secretary at my dad's company and also manage our home. My dad took over the business from my grandpa 2 years ago. Being the boss's daughter, guys usually approach me for money. I've never really been in love before. I stopped talking about my family to avoid attracting gold diggers. That's when I met David, the man who became my husband. I asked my friend who introduced us to not mention that I'm the boss's daughter. David doesn't gamble or smoke, and he drinks moderately. He was my dream guy, always telling me he loved and adored me. I thought I could spend my life with him. But when I told my dad about marrying David, he said, "Michelle, it's okay to marry him, but don't let him know you're the boss's daughter." I argued, "Dad, he's a good person. He's not after money." Dad insisted, "I don't want you to have problems. Let's revisit this after a year of marriage. If David stays the same, we'll talk about the company." Reluctantly, I agreed. Dad knew about my past bad experiences with guys after money. He just wanted to protect me. I decided to follow Dad's advice and keep quiet about being the boss's daughter for a year. Until then, I'd just be a regular secretary. So despite everything, David and I tied the knot. But now, a year later, I still haven't told him the truth. Why? Because he's changed. After the wedding, he became distant and cold. He'd come home from work in a bad mood, criticizing everything, even the dinners I made. "Hamburgers again? We're not kids. Can't you cook something different?" "But David, you used to love them. I've made them lots before." "Don't argue. You always make the same dishes. Besides salad and soup, you should know how to cook at least 5 other things." "5? That's too much. I have work too, you know. When I ask you to do something, you should do it. I married you, so listen to me." I'm sorry." The warmth and kindness he once had vanished, replaced by a coldness that felt as sharp as ice. At first, I thought he was just having a rough day, but things kept getting worse. After 6 months of marriage, David turned into a full-blown tyrant. He'd nitpick about everything, from how I did the laundry to how I cleaned the house. If I dared to speak up, he'd yell at me with a terrifying look. Enduring his yelling was one thing, but sometimes he'd even throw away the meals I cooked. A year into our marriage, his tyrannical behavior hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Just the other day, I got home late from work, and he immediately started shouting, "You're late. Do you even know what time it is?" I'm sorry. Work got busy. I'll start dinner now." "Busy? A secretary like you shouldn't have that much work. If you're late again, you're quitting your job." But that's not fair. I couldn't argue with him out of fear. Looking back, I wonder if I should have left him sooner. Despite my parents' concerns, I kept the truth hidden after getting married. I didn't want to disappoint them, so I dealt with everything silently. Then one day at work, my father called me into the reception room during a break. Since I often helped him as a secretary, going into the reception room wasn't unusual. When I entered, my father was already there. "What's up?" I asked. My father looked pleased and said, "It's been a year since you married David, right? Time to tell him the truth, like you promised." "Oh yeah, we agreed on that. Is something wrong? You seem uneasy." "Well, yes, but it's just, right now things are a bit." Seeing my worried face, my father smiled and patted my shoulder. "Had a spat with David? It happens, especially for newlyweds like you. Your mom and I had our share of arguments too. But look at us now, still happy together. You'll be fine, Michelle. It's not exactly a fight. Don't worry, everything will be okay. Couples argue, right? You're right. Anything else bothering you? No, I'm okay. Nothing else. But I think I'll wait for things to calm down a bit before bringing it up, I said. Don't let it bother you too much. Every couple has their disagreements. My father reassured me, thinking it was just a small argument. I hadn't confided in my parents about David's behavior to spare them worry, so my father assumed everything was fine. You should make amends with David soon, he advised before leaving the room. Alone, I wrestled with emotions I couldn't articulate. Despite my parents' reservations, I had married David. I couldn't bear to tell my father about our worsening relationship. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I'd have to address it eventually to avoid suspicion. To keep my father from worrying, I had to maintain my marriage somehow. If possible, I wanted to improve our relationship. That night, I made sure to be home on time, ready to talk to David when he returned. As I finished preparing dinner, he walked through the door. I brought up the topic right away. David, we need to talk, I said. I'm tired, he complained. This is important, I insisted. As a married couple, I want us to share our lives equally and be happy together. Equal? You and me? That's ridiculous, he scoffed, grabbing my hair harshly. Ouch! I cried out, but he didn't let go. Listen to me. I did you a favor by marrying you. You should be grateful I chose you, he said, sneering at my pain. But you said you loved me? I protested. Don't be foolish. I only pretended to like you because you're obedient and good at housework, he spat. Just stay quiet and obey me, he ordered, pulling my hair closer to his face. From that moment on, I realized there was no hope for equality in our relationship. I couldn't bear to worry my parents, and divorce wasn't an option. My appetite faded away with each passing day, and I found myself merely coexisting with my roommate, who happened to be my husband. Then one morning, amidst this routine, I woke up feeling utterly drained. My head throbbed, and a chill ran through my body. Checking my temperature, I found it to be a high 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Summoning all my strength, I sat up and called out to my husband. David, I'm sorry. I don't think I can manage breakfast today. What? Why not? I pleaded. I have a fever of 104. I'm in agony. Can I just stay in bed? In response, my husband let out a frustrated sigh and snapped, neglecting your duties because of a fever. Get to work, you lazy thing. But please understand, I'm really unwell. Enough excuses. You're just a maid. Don't you dare disobey me. Please, just for today, I'm begging you. With a loud click of his tongue, he stormed out of the room, leaving me trembling uncontrollably. I finally realized I was being pushed to my limit. If I keep going like this, I'll truly break down. This way of life will drive me insane, both mentally and physically. I know I need to take action, but I'm too exhausted to think clearly with this fever clouding my mind. Maybe it's the stress catching up to me, but I drift back to sleep. Hours later, I'm jolted awake by my husband's furious voice. Didn't I tell you to wake up, you idiot? Confused, I see it's already dark outside. While my fever has dropped, I still feel weak with a lingering headache. Despite my condition, he continues his tirade. I called you several times. What were you doing sleeping? Called? I sent you a text that I'm bringing my boss home. Weren't you supposed to prepare drinks and snacks? My husband demanded. Wait a minute. You knew I was sick today, right? And yet you brought your boss home? I invited him to continue drinking at home. My promotion depends on this. Get up and get things ready now. No, I can't. I'm still in my pajamas, and I'm not feeling well at all. Stop making excuses. Just get out here now. He yanked me by the arm and forced me to stand in the kitchen, then hurried back to his boss. Sorry to keep you waiting. Please come on in. I could hear my husband speaking cheerily from the entrance. Are you sure this is okay this late? I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate. That's what I've been saying. I don't have a wife, just a housemaid. I'm a housemaid. Kind of like a main wife, you could say. But please don't mind. With that, my husband ushered his boss into the living room. I stood in my pajamas, feeling embarrassed and makeup-free. Nice to meet you. My husband talks about you often. I apologize for my appearance, I said, bowing my head. Ah, I'm Mr. Smith, the section chief. I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. Please don't worry about me. I'll prepare something right away, you replied. As I hurried back to the kitchen, hiding my face, my husband started scolding me. Hurry up and make something. You're utterly useless, he berated. I'm sorry. Just give me a moment, I pleaded. Stop talking and start working, he snapped. How much more embarrassing do you need to be, even with the section chief here? I'm sorry. I apologize, Mr. Smith. Our maid is quite incompetent, my husband explained. The section chief remained silent, his expression tense. Despite my efforts to prepare drinks and snacks, my husband continued to make cutting remarks like, "You're really useless." While my husband was in the bathroom, Section Chief Smith initiated a conversation. Excuse me. I couldn't ignore him, so despite feeling flustered, I responded, yes. Is there something you need? You're CEO Allen's daughter, aren't you? My last name used to be Allen, I confirmed, realizing he meant my father, CEO Allen. How did you know? I visited your father's company for business before. You served me tea once, right? Wait, you were from that time. I typically attended meetings with our business partners, serving tea and being introduced as Mr. Allen's daughter. Smith was one of those people. Although David's workplace had become a client of my father's company, I hadn't told my father that David worked there. Glancing towards the bathroom, Smith continued in a hushed tone. What's going on with your husband's behavior? Is he always like this at home? Yes, I admitted. I can't believe what you've been enduring. Why haven't you told Mr. Allen? Well, regardless, this can't continue. Leave it to me, Smith said, looking me straight in the eyes as he quickly packed up and left. In that moment, I felt a weight being lifted off my shoulders. It was like finding an ally in a moment of despair. When David returned from the bathroom, he was shocked to find that Smith had left. Why didn't you stop him? He yelled at me, but I chose to trust Smith's words and endure it. Several days later, I was called to my father's company and found both Smith and a visibly shaken David waiting. What's going on? Why are you both here? I asked, confused by the situation. In the tense atmosphere, my father addressed me with a serious expression. I heard from Smith. You've been mistreated by David, haven't you? Well, I struggled to respond. Understanding my intentions to spare him worry, my father expressed his gratitude. Thank you, Smith, for bringing this to my attention and helping my daughter, my father said, and Smith bowed in acknowledgement. Then my father turned his stern gaze towards David. David, I can't believe you've behaved this way. I regret allowing you to marry my daughter. Please wait, David pleaded, visibly shaken. I had no idea you were our business partner's president. I didn't know Michelle was a CEO's daughter, David interjected. Enough. So if you did know, you would have treated Michelle better. You're truly despicable, my father rebuked. No, there's no excuse for my behavior, David responded. Excuses? I'm going to report you to your company's CEO. We have a long-standing relationship, my father declared. No, please. David's eyes welled up with tears as he sank to his knees. Then he turned to me, pleading, Michelle, please talk to your father for me. You want me to speak up? I raised my voice, releasing my pent-up frustrations. Do you have any idea how much I've suffered because of your controlling, chauvinistic behavior? I've endured it silently, trying to salvage our relationship. But you destroyed everything, treating me like a servant and constantly belittling me. Do you know how degrading that was? Michelle, please forgive me, David begged. Enough. Don't you dare address me by my name so casually. No amount of apologies will ever be enough. I don't care what happens to you. You reap what you sow. If you understand, stay out of my life forever, I concluded, resolute in my decision. At the climax of my outburst, David broke down in tears. Smith gently guided him out of the reception room, offering a respectful bow before leaving. Eventually, David and I decided to divorce. When my father informed David's company's president about the incident, he lost his job due to poor behavior at work. Without any severance pay, David moved back in with his parents, who were already aware of the situation. His father reprimanded him severely and forced him to leave their home. Now, David works long hours at a factory to make ends meet, while also fulfilling his alimony obligations to me. Meanwhile, I returned to my parents' home after the divorce and focused on rebuilding my life. I've since fully recovered and dedicated myself to my career. I've maintained a close friendship with Smith, meeting him regularly. Although I'm not considering remarriage at the moment, if I do decide to tie the knot again, I hope to find someone like him. When that time comes, my dream is to create a happy and fulfilling family.